The NFL offseason is here for 30 of 32 NFL teams and will soon be here for the Eagles and Chiefs too. And during the NFL offseason, teams try and improve their roster enough for a chance to eventually be called Super Bowl champions. But with there being 32 teams, the reality is not every NFL team will always be on the same timeline, not even close. And there will be teams this offseason looking to take the next step to give them a better chance of either getting to the playoffs next year or getting back to the playoffs with the goal to win multiple playoff games. And in today's video, we will be discussing several NFL players who could get traded this offseason. It's not just a player who was benched or a player who was disgruntled. There are a lot of factors when discussing players who could get traded every offseason, and this year will be no different. Whether it's a player on an expiring rookie contract or a player who has failed to live up to expectations since being a high draft pick, there will be no shortage of players getting moved. And in today's video, we're going to break down 4 NFL players who could get traded this offseason. And there is a lot to break down with each player and situation, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with Jets receiver Garrett Wilson. Wilson being traded makes a lot of sense for him personally, as the first few years of his career, while in theory successful, probably hasn't been the start he imagined to his NFL career. He won the Offensive Rookie of the Year award back in 2022 as he had over 1,100 yards and became the first Jets 1,000-yard receiver since 2015, when Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker each eclipsed the mark. It was a good year, and the Jets of course made a big trade in the 2023 offseason to acquire Aaron Rodgers and to hopefully get back to the playoffs for the first time since 2010. This trade would of course help out Wilson, who was only 23 years old and was coming off of an 1,100-yard year and was being thrown passes from guys like Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and Chris Streveler. Unfortunately, we all know how the 2023 Jets season ended, as Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles just 4 snaps into the year, and the Jets season was effectively over. It happens. Guys get injured, and unfortunately franchise quarterbacks get injured, and more often than not when they do, the franchise's season goes down the drain too. But heading into 2024, the expectations were high. Despite Rodgers going down just 4 snaps into the 23 season, the Jets still managed to win 7 games, and Wilson still managed to go for over 1,000 yards, this time getting thrown passes from guys like Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and Tim Boyle. And while Wilson had a career high in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in 2024, it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because the Jets finished 5-12, and pretty much anything that could have went wrong for the Jets this past year went wrong. Former head coach Robert Saleh was fired after a Week 5 loss to the Vikings, and Joe Douglas was fired after their Week 11 loss to Indy, in which they fell to 3-8. Wilson has displayed great talent over the past 3 years and will be just 25 years old in Week 1 of the 2025 season. And if you are Garrett Wilson, knowing how much you have gave to this organization over the past few years, how could you not be upset with how the first 3 years of your career has played out? I know guys get drafted to losing organizations all the time, and there's a reason only one team can be Super Bowl champions every year, but this team has not made the playoffs since all the way back in 2010, which is by far the longest active postseason drought in the NFL. Garrett Wilson will soon get paid, and the only question is by who. And I think one team in particular makes a lot of sense, and it's the Denver Broncos. They are coming off of a year in which they won 10 games for the first time since 2015, and Courtland Sutton will turn 30 in October and is entering the final year of his deal. I think it is also worth noting the new Jets general manager Darren Muji was a longtime Broncos employee, and the relationship between him and Broncos general manager George Patton is obviously there. That obviously isn't to say that Muji will be doing his old team a favor and give them Garrett Wilson for pennies on the dollar by any means, but the relationship is there, and the Broncos need to do everything they can to help out Bo Nix while he is in the rookie contract window. There's also a lot of uncertainty around the Jets' current quarterback situation, and you only get one NFL career, and if Garrett Wilson is frustrated with how the first few years of his career have played out, you really couldn't blame him. And getting a fresh start in Denver along with a new contract makes a lot of sense for both sides. Next up is Falcons quarterback Kirk Cousins, and there's a couple of landing spots that make a lot of sense for Kirk, and we're going to dive into each of those. One thing that I think needs to be remembered with Kirk Cousins is how he played at times during the 2024 season. He absolutely torched the Bucs on Thursday night. He threw for over 500 yards. He broke the Falcons single-game record, which was previously held by Matt Ryan on Matt Ryan's night in Atlanta, and threw for 4 touchdowns, and the Falcons won in overtime. A couple of weeks later, he shredded the Bucs again, and threw for 4 touchdowns, and eventually shredded the Cowboys as he threw for 3 touchdowns in what was a Falcons blowout win. Kirk had a couple of really good games in 2024, and as we know, the NFL can sometimes stand for not for long. Now, a lot of the time, we associate that with players' careers, as one injury can change everything in football, and that's unfortunately how it goes. But not for long can also stand for both coaching and executive careers, and if your job is on the line, why would you not try and bring in Kirk Cousins, knowing what he's shown you off of the torn Achilles and what he's shown you in the past 365 days? Yes, Kirk obviously had a bad end of the season, though I am under the belief that that was not the Kirk Cousins that was playing earlier in the year, as Kirk at any point in his career has not thrown for 1 touchdown to 9 interceptions in the final 5 starts like he did in 2024, and I am under the belief that he can get back to at least close to the player that he showed at times earlier in 2024, and if your job is on the line, or if you are in a tough situation quarterback-wise, why would you not at least call the Falcons and see what they want for Kirk? Now, we know what the Falcons have said publicly about Kirk, and we know they're not going to come right out and say, hey, we do not want this guy on our team, and that if you are a Pittsburgh, New York Jets, or a team like Cleveland, or maybe even the Giants, please trade for this guy because we don't want him on our team anymore. It's not going to work like that. But when you sit back and think about it, why would Kirk Cousins not be traded this offseason? The 2025 quarterback class has some interesting prospects, but we can all acknowledge it is nowhere close to the 2024 quarterback class, and if you are a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who, as we know, do not have losing record seasons, are never going to be selecting high enough to go get a Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, much less any of the top 6 quarterbacks that were selected in the top 12 last year, why would you not want to give Kirk Cousins a shot when you know the cost isn't going to be that much? That doesn't apply to just the Steelers. That could also apply to the Giants if, in fact, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders both go 1-2, and you are sitting there at pick 3 without a quarterback, and you need to trade for somebody like Kirk Cousins. Kirk being moved this offseason makes a tremendous amount of sense for both sides, as he wouldn't be the expensive backup in Atlanta, and they could still get some draft capital for him. Now, he does have a no-trade clause, so that does need to be acknowledged for the purpose of this video, but there's definitely going to be suitors for Kirk Cousins. The quarterback market this offseason is extremely different in 2025 compared to 2024, and there's a reality where several NFL GMs are on their last gasp for their job. The Giants is, of course, a big one with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Now, I do think they will select a quarterback in the first round, but I also don't think it would be the worst case for them to trade for Kirk Cousins either if the price is right. And what has to be remembered here is the price is not going to be a lot for Kirk Cousins because the Falcons have already made their decision with Michael Penix. And granted, I do think that is the correct decision because I think Penix's ceiling is very high and I like him a lot as a player, and that Kirk Cousins was never going to be the long-term answer. Kirk getting moved makes a lot of sense for Kirk personally. It makes a lot of sense for the Falcons to get him off the roster and then not have to think about that anymore aside from the financial implications, and to move on and to wish Kirk and his family the best. As we know, quarterbacks are always in need in the NFL, and I would be pretty surprised if somebody doesn't cough up some draft capital somewhere for the 37-year-old veteran quarterback. Next up is Myles Garrett of the Browns, and I'll be honest with this one, out of any of the players in today's video, I think this is the least likely one to happen, even as much as it makes sense for Cleveland to move on from their talented pass rusher. For whoever would be acquiring Myles Garrett, the benefits are obvious. You would be getting a player who has 6 Pro Bowls and 6 All-Pros to his name, 4 of which are first-team All-Pros, and a guy who would obviously give your pass rush a significant boost. You would also be getting a player who has proven he can stay healthy, as he has played in 66 of the possible 68 games over the last 4 years. As we know, availability is the best ability, and Myles has certainly proven he can stay on the field. He is a future Hall of Famer, and I know this word gets tossed around quite a bit in the pre-draft process, but he was a generational pass rushing prospect, truly. No disrespect is intended to Aiden Hutchinson, Will Anderson, or Abdul Carter, but Myles Garrett was a much better prospect than all of those guys, and there's no general manager that would disagree, speaking strictly as prospects. And why this would make sense for Cleveland to trade him away is pretty clear. They just finished with the second worst record in the league and went 3-14. Their offense was an utter embarrassment week after week, and they put up a combined 26 points in the final 4 games of the year while committing 13 turnovers. The reality is this team needs as much talent as possible to try and get better and to be able to win games. Forget the possibility of them going on the road in Buffalo or Baltimore with the season on the line, much less Kansas City. This team needs to have more talent so they can focus on not getting beat by the Giants at home, or the Raiders on the road, or the Saints by 21 points off of their bye week. And trading Myles Garrett would allow you to restart and not have the public pressure of keeping your franchise cornerstone happy in the process. And I would feel bad for Myles in this scenario because he has done everything he can to help make this team a winner, and it's unfortunate his franchise is now paying the costs of what will probably be the worst trade in NFL history. He will turn 30 in December of this year, and at that point you legitimately have to question how many years he has left. And when he does turn 30, assuming he plays all 17 games this year, he will be 134 games into his NFL career, and obviously the money is good for Myles and will continue to be good, but if his team continues to stink and he's laid his body on the line year after year after year with only a single playoff win to show for it, why would he not demand a trade at that point and force his way out of Cleveland, knowing he is on the downside of his career? And I know there was a point late in the 2024 season where Myles basically said that he wants a plan laid out for what the franchise is doing at the quarterback position, and I would say this, before any moves happen this offseason, we all know the quarterback market is thin this offseason, and it does not take a genius to figure that out. And whether Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders ever becomes a good quarterback is a mystery at this point, but by the time they would be able to compete in the playoffs, Myles would probably be 31 or 32, maybe even 33, and then I think you have to ask the question of whether or not Cam or Shedeur can lead a team into Cincy, Baltimore, Buffalo, or Kansas City in consecutive weeks in the playoffs and lead the Browns to the Super Bowl. And that's the toughest part about being in the AFC right now, is trying to get through any of those teams, and especially Kansas City, and in a lot of ways, it would benefit both Myles and the Browns for him to be traded this offseason. Next up is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, and I think this makes sense for each side to mutually part ways for a couple of reasons. The Dolphins entered Week 18 against the Jets, the same Jets that struggled all year and were the laughingstock for a good portion of the season, with a chance to get to the postseason. It also would have required a Broncos loss to the Chiefs' backups, and as we know, the Broncos beat the Chiefs 38-0, so that part didn't hold up, and the Dolphins losing the game really doesn't matter, because even if they won, they would not have made the postseason. But let's play out the scenario that they did. Even if Miami gets to the postseason, I think they would have been one and done and that their season would have been extended 7 days. But after the loss, Tyreek Hill said that I'm out. And that was the end of the discussion. I'm out, bruh, end quote. And that rubs me the wrong way for a couple of reasons, because he is a team captain, and as a team captain, you are supposed to set the example. And whenever you are a team captain, whenever times get tough, you are supposed to be leading the team through adversity. And Fox also caught Jalen Waddle on camera saying, "Tyreek, are you out, bruh?" with the Dolphins down 12 points late in the third quarter. That can rub a lot of teams the wrong way. And I think it makes a lot of sense for the Dolphins to move on from Tyreek due in large part to this. There were a lot of rumors that he was late to meetings over the past couple of years, and that's obviously not good, again, from a team captain. But one thing that I do think needs to be noted is Tyreek was never going to be a 1,700-yard player year after year after year, and in the one year where we see a lot of things not go his way, and the team especially not go the way that the Dolphins wanted it to in 2024, Tyreek kind of shut down. So this is very much going to be a double-edged sword, and this is going to be a high-risk, high-reward trade. Now, one team that I think makes a lot of sense for Tyreek Hill to go to is the Washington Commanders. Now, if you hear that and immediately push back and basically say, we do not want that in our locker room, we do not want Jaden Daniels to possibly be influenced by that with the late meetings, with the negative culture that Tyreek had instilled during his time in Miami, and we really love what Dan Quinn is building, I completely understand that, and I am simply pointing out the possibility of Washington trying to make a big splash with what would not cost a lot, and obviously having the financial capability to do so. It would pretty much be a one-year run, and if it works out and Tyreek becomes even close to the player that he was in 2022 and 2023, great, and the Commanders would have one of the best offenses in all of football. The reality is, if the Dolphins want to trade Tyreek Hill, they're going to have to take a hit on what was a much different player 6 or 7 months ago. There was a lot of negative publicity around Tyreek in the 2024 season, and especially with how it ended, and then you throw in the fact that he'll be 31 at the start of the 2025 season, I don't think there's going to be a lot of suitors for Tyreek Hill. It would be made known right from the start that Tyreek's leash is pretty short and that he can't have any of the nonsense that came with Tyreek Hill over the past few months during the 2024 season. I think Washington makes a lot of sense because he would be going to a contending team with an electric young quarterback, and there would be a lot of winning in Washington, which is what Tyreek Hill wants. That's what any player wants. I think another player that makes a lot of sense to get traded is Giants offensive lineman Evan Neal. This would very much be a case for a late 6th round pick for a 7th round swap, and hope that a team could get something out of him, and hope that he can have a sort of career resurgence like Mekhi Becton had with the Eagles. That of course is easier said than done, and that of course also helps when you have a guy like Jeff Stoutland coaching your offensive line. Evan Neal was a top 10 pick a couple of years ago, and if the Giants could get something from him, I think they would, just to move on and just to get some draft capital in return. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 48% of people watching are subscribed, and we're closing in on 180,000 subs. I cannot thank you guys enough for the support, and until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.